Friends, good morning. It's often a really wonderful thing to have a significant portion of worship to center right at the top of something like this. So friends, I'm so pleased to see you. And the first question I have is just wave at me to answer this one. How many of you had a chance to follow that link to the resource document we're introducing today? You don't have to have read the whole thing, but have you seen it and kind of skimmed it and you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, okay. So at least a third of you, maybe half. That's good news. So friends, I'm glad that we went around and we talked about what are our hopes. And what I can reflect back to you is that today, for at least the first portion of this gathering, we're going to be talking about the document that went out to you before we started, but it is okay if you do not have prior knowledge of it. You will not be confused. Zachary approached me a few months back and asked if I'd be interested in taking on a piece of work, writing something for friends to use as a resource for virtual and hybrid meetings. And we were really clear that what was needed most was not another document about the physical technology. If that is something, a resource that you're looking for, they do exist and we can connect you to such a document. Thank you for the link, Zachary. But that is not at the heart of what we're talking about today. The question we're going to start with for my portion of this gathering is, if your meeting is virtual or hybrid at this time, then what are some of the spiritual implications of that? And how do you discern what happens next if that is the condition that you are currently in as a meeting? We will hit on some things that will help with questions like, what do I do if there's tension in my meeting about being hybrid or virtual? That's not our focus, but we're going to touch on some things that are relevant to that for sure. I'm going to start sharing my screen in a moment. I'll give a little bit of an introduction. My hope is that the intro doesn't last more than 15 minutes. Then we'll have some time to work together in conversation in small groups. We'll come back and do a little bit of sharing together. And then I will give the time over to John Marquette for the next piece. Sound okay? Okay, I see some nods. That's good news. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share. For me personally, the last couple of years have very often felt like that. It's been a lot of stuff happening really, really fast. And I have felt as though I've had to make a lot of decisions very quickly, and as though my meeting has had to make a lot of decisions very quickly. And the truth is, we have been doing the best that we can. And we've been doing the best that we can to pray and be in connection with the divine and figure out what is right and where we are led. But it has been, to an extent, emergency after emergency. That's been our condition for a long time. My hope today together, and also with this document, is to help meetings take a breath. Focus on right now. It doesn't mean that 2 years of being really hurried and tense and trying to hold the needs of many different people, it doesn't mean that that's going to go away. That is very, very present for all of us. But can we take a moment and focus on our meetings the way that they are right now? And ask, okay, God, we might not have planned this exactly. We might not have intended to be where we are in this moment. But here's where we are. And how can we follow in terms of what happens next? What does faithful mean now? When I take a breath and I kind of lean back and I start with worship, this is what worship looks like in my meeting right now. This is literally what worship looks like in my meeting right now. This is a photograph of our meeting on a Sunday morning. Some of us are in person. Some of us are on Zoom. Some of us meet at 9:30 in the morning when there isn't a Zoom connection because we need that in-person only gathering. But this is a picture of worship. This is where the deep listening is happening right now. I ask myself, what else is true about my meeting? There's this. This is joyful. Our children have started coming back. We have a children's program again at 11 o'clock in the morning. I haven't physically been there. I don't know that all the children are back. I don't even know what they're doing, but there are children among us again, and that is part of our condition now. There's a Bible study happening. This is an interesting thing because we had Bible study before the pandemic, but now it's happening twice a month. It used to be once a month. And of all things, they're reading the book of Job, and their numbers are going up. They're getting to gather more and more people for Bible study. This is part of who we are too. When I sign on to Zoom on a Sunday morning, I see a lot of people who are new, and I'm joyful. There are new people. That's a wonderful thing. But I chose a picture of someone from the back because I don't know them and they don't know me. They are more or less strangers, and I believe they consider themselves part of our meeting because I see them again and again, and it's been months, but we don't know each other. This is part of my meeting too. We've lost some friends. Some of them we have lost literally. Some of them died. Other friends have sort of disappeared, and I'm not too sure why. They're just gone. I could probably find out. We recently were able to open our homeless shelter again. My meeting, 15th Street meeting, has had a homeless shelter every night of the year for decades. And when COVID started, there was no way to keep it open safely, and we had to shut it down. We just recently were able to get it started again. A couple of months ago, I was sitting in a meeting, I think it was a business meeting, and we asked the question, those of you who are attending on Zoom, why is it that you're attending on Zoom? We wanted to get an idea of where people were coming from. How were they making the decisions they were making? And I found something out that broke my heart. I found out that in the last 2 years of isolation, at least a half a dozen of the friends in my meeting have aged enough, have decreased their physical capacity enough that they are no longer capable of getting to meeting. The public transportation in New York City is too hard. And what I realized in that moment is that my meeting will never be all together in one place in person again, the way I remember it. It can't happen. And this is part of us too. Our nominating committee is really struggling because a lot of friends are having a hard time. We're really tired and the work feels like a lot. When I think about who are we as a meeting right now, this is what comes to me. This is where we are in this particular moment. This is our truth. And I'm going to go quiet for just a minute. It won't be very long. And give you a chance in the silence to reflect on who is your meeting right now. Not what you were a couple years ago or what you remember, but what is your condition as a meeting right now, this minute? And we're just going to do it in quiet, and it's only going to last a few seconds. Who are you as a meeting right now? When I look at you, I can see a few smiles. I can see a couple people taking notes, and I can see some expressions of overwhelm which I understand. When I start to think about my meeting this way and I hold my meeting this way, it is tempting to try to consider all the pieces at once. And that starts to feel a little bit like this again, just a little bit. So I can take a breath and go back to worship. The resource document that we are introducing today is structured in a way that you can take it in little pieces, one section at a time. And I built it in a way that it will feel familiar, that there's a little bit of text, and then there are some queries. And then there's a little bit of more text, and then there are some queries. It's the kind of document that we are all accustomed to using. And my recommendation is, if you use it in your meetings, take one piece. Maybe take one piece for a whole month. Have some worship over the two queries. Spend some time together. Really lean into that piece. And then go to another. Trust in the light that gives life and empowers everyone who comes into the world. That's from Your Faith and Practice. And I liked it so much that it's in the introduction to the resource document. Trust in the light that gives life and empowers everyone who comes into the world. There's a promise inherent in that. We have been given life. We will be empowered. We can do this. This is my meeting. Yours may be similar. It's probably at least somewhat similar, but I bet there's some differences too. And when I lean into, okay, so what are the pieces? What are friends' meetings today? Here's some of what comes up for me. There's worship and corporate discernment too. Sometimes we call this business meeting, but corporate discernment can happen in other ways. Generational relationships are part of who we are as friends. Religious education for children, that's another piece. Pastoral care. Socialization and fellowship, that's really important to meetings. We don't always articulate it, but it is. Religious education for adults. Remote membership. Meetings that were entirely in person 2 years ago may not have been thinking about this very much, but those of us who are hybrid or virtual today have quite a lot possibly of remote members and attenders that are very physically far away from where we have traditionally been. It is part of who we are. Nominations and thinking flexibly about how we go about doing the work of the meeting, trying new things. Transitions and endings are part of who we are now. Relational local ministries. What I mean by that is the homeless shelters and the preschools and the food banks and the peace scholarships, the kinds of things that meetings do that are ministries within the local community, the neighborhood immediately around the meeting house. And there are some other pieces that maybe didn't rise to the sorts of things that showed up on my picture right away, but they're part of who we are. We have property. We have budgets. Being good neighbors. How do we relate to the people who live nearby or work nearby our meeting house? Quarterly and yearly meetings. And other Quaker institutions, we have relationships to these groups. Intervisitation, the practice of worshiping with other friends. And outreach. Some meetings have been paying attention to that in the last couple of years, but mine hasn't. We haven't had the energy. And witness too, our witness to the world, that has been part of who we are always. You can write all these things down if you need to, but you don't have to, because sitting in worship and working on this resource document, these are all of the pieces that became the subject headings for that PDF. So for every one of the pieces that you're seeing on your screen now, there's a little bit of text and a couple of queries. And we're coming at this from the angle of, if your meeting is hybrid or virtual, what are the implications of that? I talked about going back to that center, that place of worship. And worship actually is where the change started for most, if not all of us, because when this pandemic came, we recognized if we are going to continue to worship together, we have to find another way to do it. And suddenly things became possible that hadn't been possible before. We started looking at things like, can we worship by video conference? Can we worship by telephone? And now suddenly we have hybrid worship arrangements, and we have worship arrangements with remote members that are very far away. It was a reaction to the pandemic. It was faithful, and we were doing the best we could. And a lot of us didn't realize in the moment that we did that, that our worship is connected to all of these other things. So when we became a hybrid or virtual worship community, there were implications for the other pieces as well. We don't have to hurry. We can take our time. And we can hold these pieces in worship together. I'm going to go ahead and move us into a piece where you can have a chance to practice some of this. So we're going to read one of the sections together. I chose the pastoral care section, not because I necessarily thought it was the best section or anything like that, but because I know that pastoral care is something that all of us are connected to in some way. There is nobody in any Quaker meeting that does not at least consider the question of pastoral care at some point. We give it, we receive it, we wonder about how it will happen. So we're going to read that section together and then take just shy of 20 minutes to consider the queries in small groups. This is your chance to try this and just see what working with the document is like. You have been listening to me speak for 15 minutes. I think it might be nice if you heard a different voice. So if there's someone who would be willing to read several paragraphs who could raise their virtual hand, that would be great. I won't see your physical hand because I can't see you all right now. But if somebody would volunteer and raise their virtual hand, I will see that. Suzanne, that would be awesome. If you would unmute and then just read as I go through the slides, that'd be great. Suzanne is searching for her mute button.
Okay.
There you go.
Friends gathering online see one another mostly from the neck up while seated. Under these circumstances, it is difficult to perceive a child growing or maturing. We may not notice a pregnancy. It's also harder to notice changing physical capacities in those who are elderly or have been ill. If friends join online gatherings by phone or with their cameras disabled, we lose all access to visual cues. Therefore, Quaker meetings that are hybrid or virtual might need to begin pastoral care with the noticing phase. In some meetings, pastoral care committees regularly call and check in with members and attenders. Another approach is to divide the meeting into small groups, each of which meets socially and practices mutual care. Meetings may also establish a sharing of joys and sorrows at the end of each meeting for worship. This provides a natural platform in which friends can let others know if they are having difficulties. It's important to remember that pastoral care doesn't always require committee approval. Pastoral care may encompass food and shelter, emotional needs, celebration of joys, counseling through conflicts, and helping people make difficult decisions. Some of these things can be provided unofficially by caring individuals as natural part of being a community. Other types of pastoral care require expertise, sustained effort, or both. In these cases, entrusting the care to a committee or working group is appropriate and useful. Support for a friend undergoing long-term treatment for an illness is an example of such a concern. Pastoral care committees can also seek training in such things as addiction support, mental wellness, and abuse response. Most friends are not experts in these areas and should not act as though they are. However, we can learn to recognize warning signs and connect friends to resources and professional help. Virtual and hybrid meetings often have participants who are far away from the primary geographic location of the meeting. Distant members can both give and receive many types of pastoral care. Clearness committees, restaurant gift certificates, friendly phone calls, get well cards can be provided from afar. But some needs cannot be met from a distance. In these cases, friends might consider, with permission, contacting the distant members' nearest Quaker meeting. If there is none, another faith-based group might help.
Suzanne, thank you so much. I appreciate that. There's nothing brand new there, at least not very much. And that's kind of by design. It's because we friends know a lot of things, but sometimes it's hard to know them all at the same time. So this is a chance to kind of focus in on one particular piece. The queries that I'm inviting you to work with are, if a member of our community, and that references your own home meeting, if a member of our community had a serious problem or joyful life event, would the rest of us know about it? How? And have we found ways in which all members of our community, regardless of physical location, can both give and receive pastoral care? I am also going to put those in the chat for you in just a moment. So they're going to go away, but I'll put them in the chat. When you go into these small groups, you will be there for almost not quite 20 minutes, and you'll be with a group of 3 or 4 friends. I'd like to invite you to practice what we've been talking about of starting in worship. Take 2 or 3 good minutes of worship before you launch into the queries. And then when you respond, the invitation is that everybody in the group answer one of the queries, and you choose which one you want to answer. You don't have to all do the same one. Respond to one of the 2 queries, and if everybody's had a chance to speak and there is still more time, then you can go around again and people can answer the second query. So give yourself 2 or 3 minutes in worship, and then take some time to speak from the silence and respond to the queries. There may be a temptation to go to a meta level. Instead of responding to the query, I want to talk about how my meeting might feel about the query. I'm going to try really hard to make sure there's time to do that when we come back to go to that meta level. And I encourage you in these groups to just respond to the query, just see what that feels like. Welcome back, friends. Welcome back. To give you an idea of what's going to happen next, we as a larger group are going to take a short period of time to debrief after the exercise you just did. Then we'll hear for a little while from John, and I got a preview and he has very cool things to say, so I'm excited about it. And then after John, there will be an open period of time for Q&A for either me or John, whichever comes up for folks. So I'm going to start just by asking a couple of friends if you have a reflection to offer on what that experience was like for you just now. How about you show me with hand motions what that experience was like just now? Okay, for some people, good. For some people, very heartfelt. There's some nodding going on, praying hands. So I'll change the question then, and I'll ask if any of you have something to share on what might it be like to bring something like that back to your meeting? That's a pretty wide open question, and I'm phrasing it that way on purpose. What might it be like to bring something like that back to your meeting? Amy?
So if I listened to my heart, what my heart was telling me, my conscience was telling me that 20 minutes would have been awesome to just give pastoral care to each other. And we could have learned a lot from that experience, but I didn't listen to my heart. So we talked a lot, about the head. We talked a lot. We talked a lot about thoughts and ideas. And so if I brought it to my meeting, that's an interesting idea, to just have a meeting with attention to pastoral care for the folks that are there while holding, the rest of the meeting in the light, because a lot of people that need pastoral care can't quite get there. They might not even feel well enough to connect via Zoom, even if they're able to.
Amy, I really appreciate what you have just said. The resource that you have received in this PDF is something that comes after what Amy just named. And it is that because that's what was asked for. That's what Zachary identified a need for in writing. But I really want to talk about the fact that there is considerable grief about how things used to be. And there's a lot of sorrow that hasn't been able to be shared from the last couple of years. And also, by the way, some people who've had really joyful things happen in the last couple of years and haven't really had a chance to celebrate. So the opportunity to share about our experiences is really big. And to talk about how we have changed and been changed is really big. That is for sure part of spiritual community at this time. Marty?
I didn't share this, but this is one of the things that our meeting does. We are divided into care groups, and prior to the pandemic, we used to meet and have dinner within our care groups, and we'd meet maybe 4 times a year to help people keep up. But we also, during the warm months, have met outdoors so that people could actually talk to each other, even during the pandemic when it was warm. During the winter, we had like a carol sing around a fire at Christmas time. And so people could actually sing and feel safe outside. And then I shared some of the people go for walks at Longwood Gardens, so that it's another way to, we just send out an email and say, anybody want to go for a walk, will be out at Longwood at a certain time, certain date, and then whoever is available will come. And then and we did this during the pandemic because outdoors it was safe, and even when we didn't feel safe to meet inside, we could at least get together and chat and be supportive to each other. So just a few ideas.
Thank you. Do we have 1 or 2 more reflections on what it might be like to try to use something like this with your meeting? It looks like the answer to my question is no, we do not have such reflections. Okay, so again, we're going to turn some time over to John. He's got some exciting stuff to say, and then we will do a Q&A period at the end, and I'll open the opportunity for, if your questions or comments are about the piece of what comes before this document, which I'm getting a sense of some people are in that place, then we can have that conversation too when we get to the Q&A. John, all you.
Emily, thank you so much. It is so great to be here and see the faces that I don't know, as well as the faces I do know. I've recently met, especially those I've recently met. Why am I here? I am here because I'm a friend who believes in community. And my faith is absolutely, categorically grounded in my community of family, my community in my meeting, my community of my city, my community of my country and the world. And my relation is about who I am is very much related to each of those increasing circles moving out from my most intimate to my friends meeting, Lehigh Valley, which has been hybrid and virtual since not too long after the March 2020 shutdown. And we've learned a lot. We've learned an awful lot about how to do it and what works. And we've talked with other meetings, and we had some great support from, for example, Lehigh University that lent us equipment, which we found worked very well for us. So John Marquette, now named as a PYM resource friend for this, which means you can contact me. And if it is within my power to come to your meeting anywhere in the 4-state area, I will come and sit with you. And we'll talk about what the Shoemaker Grant is, what it might do for you or what it's already doing for you, and what these guidelines, the queries in these guidelines mean. Briefly, Shoemaker Grant was announced in January of this year. The funds were available from PYN for primarily quarterly and monthly meetings to accomplish one of three things. One, enhance technology and or proficiency in the use of technology. Two, to achieve or improve hybrid worship. Three, to improve a meeting's website or your Wi-Fi. PYM cast a net, and there were a bunch of really good people and who are also available in some ways, who have resources of this type. And I was selected, and I am the recipient myself of, not of grant, but I'm being compensated by PYM for working with you. This is something I'm so grateful to be able to do, and it's possible to do. So what do we do? What happens when I come and sit down with you? Well, we create a space, and in that space, we talk about what's happening at your meeting and who you are and what your challenges have been in the past couple of years and how you're addressing those challenges. We don't necessarily talk about the device that I drop in front of you and say, here, this is a meeting owl, or this is a webcam, or this is a computer. Those questions we'll answer in their own time. I promise you, those things resolve. What's important is, I think, for people to know that PYM is encouraging moving into a world where we no longer can do things the way we always used to do them. And friends, that is so darn difficult. This has been really, really hard for everybody. And I see more than just glimmers of light coming out of my experience at Lehigh Valley and my experience elsewhere within yearly meeting. So, Shoemaker Grant, there may or may not be money available for you there. Membership Development Granting Group. It's the short form, friends. You can get some money from Membership Development Granting Group with the short form. And your requests will be acknowledged by Membership Development Granting Group, on which I used to sit. I no longer do. but your requests will be reviewed, and good proposals are likely to be well looked at. You're not going to be out of pocket if you don't have a whole lot of money for the entire cost of your project if you receive a grant of any kind. I'm not bringing simply one tool set. Right now, I'm speaking with you on my Mac, notebook computer, laptop computer, but I'm going to switch over to this thing. This is an Anchor PowerCam C300, which cost me about $125. What it does is, what's different from the webcam you have in your computer is that it can see about 110 degrees of view, 120, which means it can fit in the corner of your meeting room. And while you can't see it work right now, it will track motion. It just did. So when I moved my hands over here, it kind of followed me. Wow, what a great tool. It may work for you, it may not work for you. Another tool I can share is MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. The front-facing camera on this also can track motion. So if I have motion here, the camera will kind of follow where that sounding motion is coming from. This is also a really great solution, could even be a meeting in a box. The webcam is $125 more or less. The MacBook Air is closer to $1,000 than $100. And that if your meeting has good cellular reception, you don't even need a Wi-Fi connection, because if you have good cell reception, you can use cell Wi-Fi with the MacBook Air, with the iPad Air. So there's this whole scalable solution set. There are 100 monthly meetings or more. There's a solution that will fit probably every monthly and quarterly meeting that's interested in using, that's wants to move into hybrid virtual worship. And I'm really excited to come and talk with you. You can find me, I'll put my name and email in the chat, phone number. I take phone calls. And we can talk about setting up time to come and see you. I can probably do a couple of meetings a week. And depending on the time we have left and the funds left available to me, I think the month of June could be very fruitful for site visits for those of you who'd like to see me. And on that note, I'm going to switch back to the other camera so that you can see that I can. It's that easy. And I'm going to turn it back over to Emily, who will probably be telling us that it's time for Q&A.
Thanks, John. It is, but I'm going to real fast give you one more resource before we go there. So Zachary and I talked about this PDF resource document, and one thing that came out of it was we wanted it to be timeless. So if you read this document, you will see there is no mention of COVID in it anywhere. And also, it does not assume that your hybrid or virtual meeting used to be an in-person meeting. It's giving, because someday we will have meetings that are hybrid or virtual that were never in-person meetings. If your meeting can't get yet to the place of where do we go next, if you really can't get to that centered, focused on who we are place, because there's still too much of this, which is the condition of many of us, we are still just too shaken up about the last couple of years. Here's the resource I'm going to give you in case it helps. I put it into the chat. That's the set of conversation starters that I use with meetings who are wanting a chance to have mutual sharing about the experience of the last 2 years. So if they are useful to you in any way, please take them. And it just gives us a chance to talk about who we are, who we used to be, what has changed, And it's an opportunity to make some of those connections and process a little bit. With that said, questions about any of the pieces, about the Shoemaker grant, the technology pieces that John was talking about, questions about the resource document or how to use it in your meeting. Wendy starts us out with John. What is the name of the camera you demonstrated?
The name of the camera is Anchor, A-N-K-E-R, PowerConf C300. And I can pull a link out of Amazon and drop that into the chat, but I think it's probably easier just to go to Amazon and look for Anchor, A-N-K-E-R, C300. Anchor only makes one C300 product. This is it. It's a teeny box. The webcam itself is, I have it on a tripod just because I have a place to put it. Tripod's $10, $15. It's just this little bit here. And it connects with a USB cable. And handy.
There were a couple of people in not in our monthly meeting, but a neighboring monthly meeting who were worried about being on camera during meeting for worship. There were some people who were worried about domestic violence, etc. Has there been any thought given to guidance around those kinds of issues? People who don't want to be on camera. Has there been any thought other than sitting, sitting somewhere in the meeting house, which is what was done apparently?
I have an answer to that, and John might have more. Mary, one of the things that's specifically in the document in the piece about worship is to make sure that the entire meeting house is not on camera, that there is a sliver of the meeting house where people can know that they will not be in the shot. And the other very common solution is to have a non-hybrid meeting for worship that also occurs. There are a lot of meetings doing 2 worships in the same day, which is not a bad solution if you are also paying attention to making sure that there are times when you're all together, or you do kind of end up accidentally splitting into 2 different meetings. And John, do you have more specificity?
What I can say is that the camera angle that I demonstrated has a view that does not encompass the entire meeting room, ours, a room. Sensible configuration can make sure that there's always a safe space within the meeting where people do not need to be seen. And the simple solution is the best solution. Create a safe space.
I want to put a shout out to not every Quaker meeting has to be hybrid. I really mean that. I think that meetings that are going to be hybrid or virtual, there is a need to do the discernment about what does that mean and how does it influence all the parts of who we are together. But there will be Quaker meetings that come to clarity post-pandemic. You know what? That's not what we're called to do, actually. And those meetings may have a different kind of mission in the world. As we do pastoral care and meetings like this, what laptop do you use, and do you use a microphone? John, I'm not sure if that's a question to you or me, but I'll say really briefly, I don't use an external mic, and mine is just a MacBook Air, and that's because I travel full time on the road, and so that's what I got. John, do you have more to say?
I can say that we at Lehigh Valley use the integrated microphone in our solution, which is a Logitech Meetup, M-E-E-T-U-P. Other meetings I can think of one meeting in particular, which is integrated. It's a assistive listening system into their own hybrid worship, which is really cool. I've seen the box that makes it happen, though I have not played with it. So most meetings seem to be able to do okay with the microphone, with attention, with a built-in microphone, with attention to where that microphone is. The larger the meeting room, the more difficult it is to get ministry from people sitting far away. And that is a matter of learning to speak up. And that's not always how ministry comes out. Ministry doesn't always come out full voiced. That's a challenge. And that's something that every meeting is probably going to work through for a long time.
Emily?
Yes, I just wanted to ask if people had accounts of how much this is interrupting their meeting, like dealing with, because I went to a talk recently and there was a lot of time trying to include people who were not in the room, which while I could see the advantage of that, it was great. It also meant that there was a lot detracted from the people who were actually there. So I'm curious to hear from people who may have experienced that, or if they've found that it was just the first couple times and everybody got over it and moved on.
Anybody experiences with trying to do things in a hybrid way and include people both in person and online? Dave?
Now, are we talking about, Emily, are you talking about meeting for worship or just online like events like First Day School or whatever?
Well, I guess either, but I maybe primarily meeting for worship being kind of the most important
Yeah,
part
mean,
of those things.
our experience, because we have had about equal, now that we're back meeting in person again, and we have hybrid at the same time. So we'll have like 15 people in the meeting house and maybe 15 people online. Although hopefully that'll start to change. Friends just basically have gotten the hang of it. When we first go on Zoom at 10 o'clock, everybody that's online is muted as they enter. That's caused less disruption in trying to settle the meeting house meeting, because that was a complaint. People were coming in on Zoom and we were hearing their dogs and their background noise and their NPR in the background and all that kind of stuff. And so people come in muted. We do have the issue of microphones and whatnot, but that's one of the things we're going to spend our technology grant on is miking up the meeting room, which we were talking about doing anyway, because we have a number of friends that have hearing issues and they were having trouble just hearing in the meeting house, period. So we're hoping to get a twofer out of that. But in general, about the only thing that's really dodgy right now in terms of what, that we've gotten less practice at, but we have to start working on, is meeting for business is really hard, hybrid wise. If I try to run a meeting for business from the meeting house and I have friends online, I literally need a friend to volunteer to watch the screen only so I can see friends waving their hands, wanting to get involved in the interaction. So we've been doing mostly business meeting online, but I want to try to get away from that as a way to encourage friends to come back to the meeting house. But yeah, it's a juggling act, but people have gotten the hang of it. It's just, you just have to practice it, and you have to be willing, friends have to be willing to have it be awkward for a while. They just have to be willing to do that. And eventually it works itself out for the most part.
Thank
Thank
Dave.
you.
Robin, I think, has more.
Yes, I was going to say that our meeting made that transition to hybrid. And the first few weeks, there was some adjusting of volume and those kinds of things. And now that we've been doing that for a year, there are still occasionally a meeting where like something moved or the connection isn't right, and we have to spend some time dealing with that. But I would say it is no more than the time we used to spend dealing with when the heat didn't come on time, or the boiler was out, or like, and then there was all this commotion about lighting a fire, and like that took longer and was probably more detrimental than the trying to get the Zoom volume readjusted, every few months.
Let's go to Marty and then Amy.
Well, I was just going to say we did our first quarterly meeting hybrid, and we found that we needed to have a couple people with the technology, one person that, because quarterly meeting, there's like more than one page of people online. So we had to have somebody looking to see who wanted to speak during the discussion. And then we had to have somebody in the meeting house. I think we had like 60 people altogether, over 60 people. So some people in the meeting house could be called on to speak. So what we did was have anybody online who wanted to speak and then go to the meeting house and say, is there anybody on the meeting house that would like to respond to the discussion? And so we worked back and forth, but it took quite a bit of coordination, but it ended up being successful.
So, Emily, I recently read your pamphlet, your Pendle Hill pamphlet about covenant community, and participated in that Pendle Hill reading group with Anna Hill organized. And so in the backdrop of that, in the light of that, this morning when we were talking about pastoral care, I reflected back to when we first were homebound with the pandemic, quarantined, and we developed a covenant community via technology. And there were lots of joys and there were lots of concerns. We had that balance. Everyone was present on the same vibration, so to speak, in the same sacred container. And when we started going back into hybrid, our meeting transitioned to it really well. People stepped up, they donated their own equipment. It just worked. And I had taken over as clerk. And so I was really, really heartened to see everybody working together. And then when we had our, so then the former clerk had, many months of clerking Meeting for Worship for Business hybrid, which actually had some efficiencies to it. And, it all worked. When we went back into the first Meeting for Worship for Business that was hybrid, it happened to be my first Meeting for Worship for Business as clerk. And it was very challenging. It was very challenging from the logistical standpoint of seeing people that were hybrid raising hands. Even if you have a good computer sitting in front of you, I mean, a person could be raising a white hand on a white background and you don't see them. So, so what happened is a couple members got pretty emotional, and to the point where they were one was screaming at me, "Clerk, you're not paying attention to me." And it was like, oh my gosh, this is really something that we have here, but I say that because, it was harder at the beginning, but we worked through it. And, there's always people that feel like they're not being heard. And what I did one month was, if I knew that we had really important things, and I just felt personally, due to, my other full-time responsibilities, I just took Meeting for Worship back, or important subjects, and handled them as a called meeting via Zoom only. And we were able to create that sacred container for spirit to work through some really difficult issues about reopening and whether we can eat together and things like this. And we were able to do it better in the Zoom container than we were sitting in the meeting house with folks present and then folks elsewhere zooming in. So I just offer that to friends as they're working through the transition, and all is well and all shall be well again.
Thanks, Amy. 3 very quick things. One, a lot of these practical pieces we're talking about in terms of hybrid business meeting are in the document, the PDF, under corporate discernment. 2, this requires patience. And one thing that can be helpful to friends gathering for something like a business meeting is just to name that at the top. Please be patient and merciful with one another, friends. All of us are going to feel like this is imperfect. All of us. And we may not feel like it's imperfect in the same direction. We might have different beefs with what's going on. So let's talk about them and let's be patient with one another. And the last thing is just encouragement to pay attention to the gifts of the friends in your meeting. For example, Amy was identifying a common problem with being able to see everybody. And sometimes that's really hard. You might actually have somebody in the meeting who's like a super good noticer. And maybe you don't even know that about that person. But if you can find that out, that might be your ideal watcher. And some people would be so over the moon to have a job like that. Have friends experimented with having shorter but more frequent business meetings online? Great question, Robin asks in the chat. If anybody wants to speak to that out loud or in the chat, or if there is a different question, that's welcome too. Marty?
I just say we've had a lot of our business meetings, I think, for committee meetings all on Zoom. And people love that because you don't have to drive to the meeting house, and we can meet at night, and it's very convenient. And I don't know if we'll ever go back to meeting in person for committee meetings. It's been great. And also the quarterly meetings, business meeting, we do that on Zoom, and that's been great too.
Thanks, Marty. I would encourage friends, keep an eye on the question of childcare. If you're having a gathering that is entirely online, by default, that means that parents' children are in the house with them, and that they may or may not be able to engage online while they are also trying to deal with their preschooler. So that's one thing we lost when if we stopped meeting in person, was the preschooler could be cared for in the next room by a friend who was specifically present to do that. All right, are we done with questions? It's feeling like we may be coming to a natural close. Then I'm going to turn time over to Zachary, but also seeing that we have a few minutes left, open invitation to share a resource in the chat. If you have a favorite resource you want to tell other people about, connected in some way to these subjects, now's the time to do that. And I'll go over to Zachary for our closing.
That is a great idea, Emily. And then if anything gets thrown in the chat, I'll take it and include in the follow-up that goes out to registrants and attendees. And so that this can be a resource both for you to refer back to and to share with people in your communities who maybe have similar concerns and want to get a sense of, for example, how the guidance document could be used, or the ways in which John Marquette is available for support. And I just want to say I am really thankful. I have a lot of gratitude to all of you for coming. And also, I think that or at least my sense, is that each of you have roles in your meetings around carrying this work of navigating change and holding space for what the impact of that change might be on your meeting, and really tending to the polarity that is, what about our history do we need to look back on and value, and what about our faith requires us to look forward and to vision. And that is a balance that requires emotional labor and holding a sense of being really clear about what we're all up to and what each of you is up to in your service. And so I am also just wanting to name that in the context of my gratitude for all of you being here today. So why don't we take a few more minutes just to worship, gather some more things in the chat if we need, and then we'll close. So let's settle into worship. All righty. Blessings to each of you. May you have lovely rest of your weekends.